Hey guys, Steve Moran here, and I am with my friend Alex Smith. I know this does not look like where we usually broadcast from. We are at the NIC conference in San Diego. And so, Alex, it's just actually really, really cool to be able to. I don't think I'm not sure I've ever done a Foresight TV with my guests being in the same room. So this is like maybe a first out of like 2.5 or 3 years, which is really cool. So we are going to talk about pricing. It's going to be such a great conversation. This is every once in a while we work with a vendor company that just has the ability to really transform operations for senior living where every single person wins. But before we get started in our conversation, let's take a look at our intro. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Alex, welcome.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
So let me set the stage, and then I want to actually have you sort of talk about your backstory. So you've been in the industry for
20 years.
Since you were before you were born.
Right? In college. Yeah. So I started in college. Yeah.
I just discovered he grew up in a town right near where I grew up, about an hour from where I grew up in this little. My town was better, by the way. He'd agree with that.
Yeah. It was a short period.
So you've been in the industry a number of years, right?
Yeah, and I started. I can go a little bit into
let's actually talk about that story.
And so coming out of I was born in San Francisco. Moved down to Arizona, Phoenix to go to Arizona State University. So I'm looking for a job, and so I see this posting for an activities director. I'm thinking that it's actually a golf resort, right? Because a lot of golf courses. Yeah. And I said to myself, well, I was pretty active in high school. I could be a activity. I was captain of my baseball team. I could do some activities at a golf course. That'd be a cool job. Show up, and there is a golf cart, but it's obviously not a golf course. And ends up being a little CCR, somewhat, mid-sized CCRC in Chandler, Arizona, called Park Regency. Actually, at the time, it's American Retirement Corporation property. So I walk in there, and I obviously know this is the wrong job. I'm not going to get this job. Long story short, I'm fumbling through the interview. They're walking me out. The executive director comes up to me and just says, "Hey, look, hop in the golf cart." And I'm like, "What's going on?" Shows me around, kind of gives me the spiel on senior living. And I'm thinking, okay, he's just going to walk me to my car. In the morning, he calls me the next day, and he says, "Hey, you're hired. We don't know what we're going to hire you for, but you're hired." And so that was my foray. So they hired me for anything and everything. So I was activities assistant. I passed out ice cream and called bingo incorrectly sometimes. Didn't enunciate properly.
Yep.
And got to spend some time on the weekends to cover sales, and that's kind of how it all started. It's been a long journey, but it was kind of serendipitous to start that way.
So one of the things I like about this is you're a guy who actually works in the industry, and you built a based on a need that you saw in your own life. Because I see lots of people who build tools because they get an idea, usually because of something their grandma, right?
Right.
And so they've got this idea, but they don't really know, they don't understand the industry, which makes it really, really hard to understand whether or not it's going to be something that actually has value. And you knew you had value, an idea for value.
Right, absolutely. I mean, so from that point on, I was very honored and to have so many opportunities in senior living. Worked my way up to sales counselor, sales director, sales specialist, and that was really interesting because I really got to see. My whole job was to go into communities that were failing in occupancy, that were in kind of these occupancy-stricken situations. So it was fascinating to start to put together like a pattern. What are the commonalities between these occupancy starved communities? Are these, what they call, they're usually in this special folder at corporate office nowadays. Right. And so that was probably one of the best experiences of my life, to be able to see that on a granular level And then later on becoming, going to a regional position where I was doing the same thing, doing it on a regional basis though, taking over occupancy stricken regions and seeing the same trends over and over again. So that's kind of, this was like the groundwork for where we're going.
Well, so, and we could probably do a whole session just on this idea of turning around buildings. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me is that you sort of have three classes of senior living buildings, and in the industry, the first class is, and it's relatively rare right now, are buildings that are essentially full, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got a big chunk of buildings that are kind of, they're doing okay, got more vacancies than they like, but they're probably breaking even or making a little money. And then of course you got some dogs but what's always, what has struck me, and I've been in thousands of buildings, is that it's less the company that's operating it than whatever the local leadership is, right?
Right.
And it just shows you that one person can make a difference, but if you have the right tools, and that's where we want to get to. So you created this tool to help senior living communities figure out optimal pricing, and we're going to dig deep into that. But how did you get this idea that you should go tackle this problem?
And so, I mean, I think it started to kind of stem up and come up in different ways. Obviously, it's a multifaceted issue when you come to recovering occupancy. But that was kind of the seedlings of where do we look at this, and then kind of like when I got into more of the mid-level or corporate level, I started to really see kind of the inner workings of how pricing was being, formulated at the corporate office. And, I think I worked around so many great organizations that had a lot of great processes, but I was seeing that I felt like there was an opportunity for better process, a better process, a better formula to come up with pricing, because, I had worked, I worked with a couple of big organizations, and I always use this one example. I had a huge portfolio, and we'd go into budget meetings, and we would, here I am, I have my folder, I have my comp set, I know what the pricing should be, I have the renovations in the market, the new developments, I have, all the data, and I'm ready for this great discussion about, pricing and what the right rate should be for each community in my portfolio. And we literally just took the drug the 5% symbol and drug it all the way down my portfolio. And this was a pretty big organization. And I said to myself, wow, this is not very data driven, right? And so I said, and this was, and I said to myself, this is going to cause problems for me. Now, for the rest of the year, I have to live with that price point and try to sell that. And in most cases, I would say 80% of the cases, it was fine. We rode the tide. We figured it out. But there were a couple situations where actually, in actuality, we could have actually done 7% or 8%. And in some cases, we probably should have done 2%. But what it did is it caused us to create our own fires. So all of a sudden, now we're reacting for the rest of the year to those situations. So I found that one of the most powerful levers in preventing these right? It's like, let's prevent forest fires, right?
Right.
So as an operator, and a lot of this, and a lot of our guests probably know this, like the last thing you want to do is like spend your whole career, whole day chasing fires. And that's why I felt like a lot of my time was spent is just putting out fires. Well, how could we have prevented those fires? And in several cases, it was a pricing issue. And if we would have tackled those, we would have been proactive about those things, like really understood our markets, understood that we had new comps coming in, we had new renovations coming in, and not waited till that occupancy dip before we reacted. Because if you wait for that occupancy dip, it could take you 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to recover using massive amount of incentives on incentive, trying to do CapEx dollars. So you're chasing dollar after dollar. When if you would have had a proactive approach to pricing, we could have attacked it earlier on with a little bit of smaller doses, if you will.
Well, so there are a couple of things that are really interesting to me about this. So I have a friend of mine who worked as an executive director for a while at a really large ALIL memory care community, and when he got to the building, they had a bunch of empty. I mean, they were probably 75 or 80% occupied. And so he started looking at the marketplace, and he realized that his biggest competitor was like less than a mile from him. It was a nicer, newer building, and their pricing was like $500 or $700 a month lower than what his pricing was. And so he went to his corporate leadership and said, if we want to get full, we've got to adjust the pricing. And they said, well, we don't really want to do that because of the capital providers. But if you want to submit something, you can do that, and it'll get sent to the pricing committee, and you should have an answer in between 9 and 12 months. Yeah. And so what they did is, to preserve this rack rate, they had empty units they could have filled, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just stupid.
Right, absolutely. And you mentioned pricing committee because I'm very familiar with pricing committee, and some of you out there may be familiar with this concept. But I think for senior living providers, especially in this market, we have to be agile. We have to be able to be able to flex to the market, because a lot of mid-sized players can flex their pricing. Now, some of the other larger, REIT-related type groups can't, because of what you said, the valuation of the property changes, right, things like that. But if you have 2 or 3 competitors that are owner-operated or family-operated, they can make those changes quite quickly. I mean, I tell this story about, I won't say where, there was a community I had in Northern California, let me just say, and it was 95% occupied, probably top 5 highest margin community in the company. And I took over the region, and I had 3 other communities that were absolute fire issues, like fire alarms down south. And so I'm focused on the south communities, and those things could have been prevented anyway 6 months ago. But I'm there to recover those 3. And so the one in Northern California, I was like not really paying attention to, but I did my comp analysis anyway, did my same process. And I'm like, wow, we're 40% above market here, but we're full. So who's going to reduce rate? Well, what we did not anticipate was we could stay full at 40% above market if we only had to do 2 move-ins a month. But what we didn't realize is that this community the attrition rate was about to explode, because those residents moved in about 18 to 22 months ago, right? So next thing you know, we go to 4 out, we go to 6 out, we go to 8 out. Now, I could sell 40% above market at 2 in, but now I have to do 8 in to cover my outs. So by the time we get to the pricing committee, and by the time we get approvals, it's 8 months down the road, and we've lost 40%. Well, it was actually a good 60% of occupancy. So to make that change, now we're in, so now at that time, it's like the pop goes the weasel game. Yeah. So I've already recovered the Southern California communities. So I'm going back up, like, now I got this problem. And so now we have to do heavy incentives,
and that's the other part of it, right? So you have your pricing, this theoretical pricing that makes everybody happy if you can get it, but you can't really get it. And so then you go into all this crazy pricing incentive stuff, right? And that's not healthy. But I think about this story that you told of this building that went zoom like that. And, it's like hotel rooms, right? I mean, that's revenue you can never, ever get back.
Right.
And sounds like it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that was just lost forever.
I think it ultimately took about, I want to say almost over a year to recover the occupancy at much, much lower rates, where we could have had a more proactive approach. And this is one of those communities that I had my research ready, and we were to talk about, like, look, you're already at 40% above. We don't need a 5% increase right here. We also have renovations going on in our closest competitors, and we had a brand new competitor coming into that market that year, but that was not part of the discussion. And so doing this blind 5%, created this huge fire and needlessly. So I use that example because, pricing sometimes, like, how do we reprice is usually done in like an acquisition or a new development, or maybe in an occupancy, like, when it does hit rock bottom, like, okay, what pricing should we do? And so usually that's where everyone's looking at, how do we reprice? But the way we built this software was like, hey, we need to look at the ones that are actually doing well as well. Don't take your eye off those stabilized communities, because if you're not having if you don't have a system, a process of pricing all your communities, and looking at those markets on a regular basis. Don't just do your mystery shops and your shops on the fire, the communities that are losing occupancy. You should understand where all your communities are in the market at every time, because at any time you could lose that momentum,
So so one of the things that you did that I'm really fascinated by is that I'll bet most people, when they do pricing in this industry today, they go out and they look at their competitors and then they lick their finger, put it up in the air, and they say, well, we're better, or at least I like my building better, and we're going to price it here. But there's actually science to it, right?
Yes, there's absolutely art and science to it. I mean, if you look at any other industry, there is a science to it. There's an art. It's an art and science. And actually, that's what got me so fascinated with the idea of pricing, because I love the blend. I'm a salesperson, at heart. I grew up in sales. I love, definitely understand the art of it. But I'm also very data driven and the science of it. And so I got super data nerd, when I started figuring out, let's figure out this problem. And, people say, oh, how did you come up with this idea? You must be no, it's really being resourceful, right? Who's doing pricing well, and what industry, and how can I take those ideas and adapt them to our environment?
Well, you actually went and got some sort of a pricing certificate, right? I want to talk about that for just a minute.
Absolutely. And a lot of people joke with me about this, but, I read every book I could read on the history of dynamic pricing, on pricing, and I just couldn't get enough. So I started looking up, different organizations. There actually happens to be a professional pricing society based out of Atlanta. They've been around for, I want to say 30 years or so, and they attract individuals from all over the world, from different industries, from commodities, utilities, which is interesting to me. Like, how would you price gas and electricity different, right? It's really just gas and electricity. But, talking to people, there is an art and science to it, right? So is it clean source and so forth, to microchip manufacturers? Interestingly enough, out of thousands of people at these conference, there was no senior living professional that I met and that I knew in there. Obviously hotels and airlines and things like that. So anyway, I went to a conference, found out about a certification they had, and I said, you know what, I want to be the expert on this. I want to dig deep, and ended up doing a year-long coursework and being certified as a certified pricing professional. And so look it up; it's a real thing. But it definitely
you're probably the only one in the whole of senior living. So that's pretty.
It might be. I hope that's not true long term. I definitely encourage other folks to do that, because and probably the biggest things I learned. Obviously, there's a science. There's actually like a calculus type formulas that you can engage in, but really the bigger topic was, and the two things that really that I learned from that mostly was value-based pricing, which we kind of touched on before, where it's like, and that versus value-based care, but value-based pricing, which is, traditionally pricing is done by, let's look at the comp set and I think we're slightly better and let's raise it. Versus value-based pricing is, how have you really understood your families and your residents so well that you're able to meet their needs at such a high level? There is no comparison, to how you're able to do that. So your price is really based on the value that you're providing to that resident versus just some arbitrary number that's set in the market.
So this is really cool to me. So I want to try a hypothesis with you, and I'm going a little bit off. I would make sure we get some important things, but I think as you, the audience, think about pricing for your communities, one of the things that really fascinates me is that you could have a brand new building with all the amenities, and you could have an older building that's obsolete, but the people love living in it, and you could price this, what would on the surface be an inferior building, at a much higher rate than you could the one that's
And I've seen that,
right?
Yeah.
So,
and we've seen. I have an example in my mind when you mentioned that, and I can't remember the exact name of the community, but this was in Prescott, Arizona. We had a community. This was one of my organizations, but it was a competitor. This competitor had not updated. I swear, their furniture was 40 years old, at least, and the carpet, everything was exactly the same, but it was clean. and it was well taken care of. They had a community, they were connected, it was active. There's just this vibe when you walked in, and and it was like, like I said, you go in there and you're like, this place is like going back in time. At the same time, the residents and the people in that community love that community, and they were getting as much or more than the newer communities in that market.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer. She did that experiment counterclockwise where she took this, I think it was a dozen men who were in their 70s and with health, frailty, and took them to this monastery and recreated a time from 22 years ago. So they played all the television shows then, they had newspapers and magazines, and then they talked about all this stuff as if it were current. And what they found is that they all had better cognitive ability, more energy, more excitement for life. And so maybe, you start thinking about it and you think, well, everybody wants to modernize these buildings, but maybe they should be demodernized.
Yeah, it's possibly true. I mean, the key is, and there was a lot of great discussions here at Nick. We had a ton of, I was doing a lot of these brain date sessions, and one of the sessions we were talking about, well, how do you create demand? How do you create demand? Like, do we have newer buildings? And then how do we just put our communities in the right place where there's demand? Oh, we should educate the community about how great we are and this and that. And one of the things is interesting because as I went through this journey to develop this product, I actually learned a lot about software development. So, from Apple to Google. And if you look at the way products are designed in those organizations, you don't just build a product and then try to sell it. That's not what they're doing. They didn't just build this is a random phone. There is actually, like, just in your iPhone, it was thousands and thousands of hours just to figure out how to work your keyboard. Like, that was a lot of work. And so there was a lot of understanding, you start with the person, the person in front of you, or the person, your client, who you want to get to, or your customer, in our case, our family. And you need to know them at such a level that better than your competition, you should know your families and know their wants, their needs, even to the point, it's almost like an anthropologist, right? Where you're following, you're understanding what are the things that are their pain points. And then you start from there and solve. And if you can do that at a higher level than anyone else, then you're getting to a value-based price because there's no comparison to what you offer at that point.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to actually put this on you a little bit. There are two things I want to touch bases on. I want to spend some time talking about how your tool works. That's really, really important to understand. But I also want to be educational. So if somebody hasn't connected with you and is not using your tool yet, because I sort of have a belief that in 5 years, everybody's going to be using it. How should they be thinking about pricing differently? So what do you want to talk about first, the tool or the concept?
Let's talk about the concept of pricing. I think that's important as far as the approach, the process to pricing, because I've had a lot of really good discussions here with everyone from asset managers to analysts to brokers to the management team, VPs of sales. And it's interesting because even the organizations that have a process, they'll admit that it's rudimentary, right? It's like, this is our best guess. We put together this, at minimum, we have an Excel spreadsheet that has a bunch of data, and then we look across the board and we go, yeah, we can kind of do this. In fact, I was talking to he was a newer owner operator that was building some communities, and I asked him, how do you guys decide what your pricing was going to be? And he said, pretty much what you said. They did this, or I like to use the meme of the dartboard. Yeah. And he goes, really? I was like, well, our sales director went out and said, we're better, and I think this should be the price, and that's it, right? So, I mean, that's an extreme version, but it sounds extreme, but actually that's probably commonly what happens in most of even large organizations, unfortunately. And I believe it's not because of the lack of talent or intelligence. It's you're using the wrong tool. Like, what else can you have? You're just limited by your data set. You're limited by the tool you use. So that's not blaming anybody, but that's how it feels. Now, at a more sophisticated, a little bit more sophisticated level, right? You at least would go, okay, let me evaluate my comps and let's rate them based on different amenities, come up with a score, scoring type system where I can say, okay, I'm legit, data, in a structured way, say, yes, I'm slightly better, slightly worse on these categories, and have a structure do that. And some organizations have that built into their comp intel. I've used them, some kind of evaluation. So that's at least the step above that approach. And then from there, kind of understanding, the rates in the market, right? Getting that baseline. What does a studio currently go for independent living or assisted living in a market? But beyond that, the other, kind of a low hanging fruit that a lot of people don't do is, and hotels do it, and anywhere else does it all the time, even in a conference center, right? If I want that room and it's near, it's a high traffic area, and that's where, maybe in a conference area, that's a good space. Or if I'm, let's say, in a retirement community, senior community, maybe being closer to the dining room or having that patio view to the courtyard because I have a pad, maybe that should be a premium room, right? So at very minimum, doing like an ABC rating on your room, so right pricing each room, which I would say probably half or more organizations that I know don't even do that. That's low hanging fruit. And so those are kind of like your low hanging fruit opportunities. But there's a lot of other factors that go into, and we can talk more about, our system and how we look at it. But, your very first step is you have to identify your primary competitors. You have to identify your value in the market. And then you kind of have a base rent. And then from there, you can start to kind of right price each particular apartment. But then there's also supply and demand, right? So how many apartments do you have left, right? So I had an example of someone share with me that they had sold out all of their studios, but they had almost 20 one-bedroom apartments available. So what does that mean? What
means
does that mean?
That they overpriced their one bedrooms and underpriced their studios.
Exactly.
It's sort of the obvious,
exactly, right? And this goes back to another discussion of, like we always believe in our industry about let's be at 100% occupancy, that's the goal. But, I would potentially push back on that and go, if you sold out all those studio apartments so quickly, did you price them too low? Right? Should they have been priced at a little bit, even if it's 2.5% more? I mean, that makes a difference over, 50 units or apartments.
And that's really free money, right? Yeah. I mean, your cost of service hasn't gone up at all. So let's talk a little bit about your tool. We don't have a lot of time left, but I want to just sort of talk about, your goal is really twofold, right? The first is to bring some science to the data. And the second is to make it so that it's practical enough and easy enough for communities to use, right? Right,
absolutely. The first goal with our software, and my first goal was to just take out the inefficiency of the process. And so where we're at today is, so everyone, for the most part, there are a few people that have a cloud-based system, but most people are using Excel spreadsheets still. And this, I believe, is the core of the problem, because first of all, I can't leverage that data, right? Unless you have an analyst or someone that can combine all your Excel spreadsheets and, like if I've done 5 shops over the last 5 years of a market, I have 5 different spreadsheets, and who knows who has 4 years ago, because I wasn't the VP of sales 4 years ago, right? So who has that file? Who updated it last? Is that accurate? Like, there are so many issues with the Excel format alone that our goal was like, let's get all this data. And even if it's 5-10 years worth of data, let's load this into the database. Now I can leverage those shops, that shop data. A lot of companies pay several $100s per shop, some larger organizations spend $100,000 to $200,000 a year on this shop data. They look at it once and then it's tucked away. Yeah. Market research data, same thing, right? They had the original market research data to develop a community. You spend $8,000, $10,000 for it, never leveraged again. Yeah. So the first step is let's leverage that data. Let's take all the data you have on a market and let's store it in the database. Let's have a central source of truth. So that was our first goal. And this is the beginnings of creating this AI pricing tool. The other advantages of this is all those other files and like, hey, what is the incentive our competitor was doing, last last quarter or last year around this time. Do we have a historical record of that? Most don't, right? You might have it on a sales director's desktop or something like that, but there's no tracking that, And then what was the impact of those incentives, right? Those things all are very useful data. And going back to the trending data, right? How has community fees changed in your particular market amongst your particular set of competitors, or second person fees or pet fees, et cetera? And your data, not just someone else, like Nick, like specifically like someone else's data, like Nick's data, you can compare it and combine it with Nick data and look at that, but you can at least have your own record that you can build based on your intelligence.
Well, and the other thing I guess I'm thinking about, and is that I go in and I make a change in my pricing because I've got an occupancy problem, and then I go do a whole bunch of other stuff at the same time, right? And all of a sudden my occupancy jumps up, and so I say, oh, I got the right price. But how do you figure out whether it was actually the price or just all the other stuff you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then your first stage is to be able to even store that, to analyze that, right? You're just like, most people aren't even storing that to be able to look back and say, okay, here was our benchmarking. Here's the communities that were priced right during these conditions, to be able to put a stamp on that, and then look for other examples in their portfolios where that pricing methodology would have worked. So like I said, going back to the very tool, like the Excel document in itself, and I've seen some pretty fancy Excel documents. A lot of people have done a really good job at them, but that tool, and I use this example, I'm using it more and more, using that tool alone to analyze your pricing is like trying to cut down a redwood with a butter knife, is what I've been saying. It's like, it's the wrong tool. And so you need to see this data in a whole new way. So another thing that part of our product that we do is relating to Extend is that we're tracking your competitors' incentives. So we will, as soon as they send out a promotion, the teams are notified. Here's the incentive. Here's the promotion. They're not waiting for that family to come in and say, yeah, actually, I was just offered $1,000 off a month for 6 months or something like that. You're not surprised by that. But the second benefit of that is that we're storing that in the database for you. And so that becomes part of the permanent record for that market. So you can go back and see what you were doing or what someone else was doing. I always use this example. This was one example where I think a lot of communities themselves don't actually track their own incentives. And so I use this example. I was with an organization and this really goes back to why I started this too, because I always wanted to make sure I've isolated all the variables, right? Like, we don't want to just exit a bunch of salespeople because they couldn't sell, but did we give them the right tools? So I had a situation where a sales director they're feeling a lot of heat, and I was feeling a lot of heat to push them to be more successful. We had a community that had done, 8 to 10 move-ins a month for 6 months straight back in, I want to say 2018. We had a new sales director come in, and the sales director was getting a lot of heat by the owner group, and I was trying to figure it out. And finally, I'm like, I don't know what to do. We've done mystery shops. I'm shadowing her tours. They're amazing. She's converting at a very high rate. I don't know how we're going to get to 10 move-ins. She's doing about 4. And of course, we had 7 or 8 move-outs, so we had to get there. So anyway, I'm banging my head. I'm almost about to have to put disciplinary action, unfortunately, and it felt so unfair. And finally, I stumbled upon an old flyer we had from that time period, and it was we were offering, I would say $2,000 a month all-inclusive assisted living.
Wow.
So I would say most people on this show would probably say, well, I could probably sell 10 move-ins a month with that type of deal, especially in this market that that was like minimum half the cost of what that would be, if not a third. And so then I brought that to owner group, and they're like, oh, yeah. Okay, no, never mind. And so I could have lost a really good salesperson, and because we were analyzing a situation and trying to fix a situation where we didn't have all the facts. And that's right? It's like, okay, let me solve this. I'm a doctor and I go to the room and I'm blind and I'm looking at the wall and I'm trying to prescribe medication to a patient, right? Like it makes no sense.
So we're about out of time here. How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you always reach out to me, Alex at talkfurther.com, and we have reach out on LinkedIn is really a good way. You can kind of see my background. And again, just a little bit of background on how I was linked. I started this software, built it up, and about a year ago, talking to the great folks at Further. I was already a client before, so I already knew Further as a great product, and ended up joining the team, selling the product to Further. So I know people always ask, like, how does Further get into pricing? Wes Fuller and the team and James at Further believed in this vision, and they invested in me and this concept, and we've been building this together with other senior living professionals for the last year, and we're ready to launch. So we'll be launching here in March for our official launch, and so excited about this product because it's truly a product that was built, and I don't like to say by me, but it was by me and other senior living professionals that all felt the same frustration. And we started from that point. So I like to say this was built by senior living professionals for senior living professionals.
Well, and one of the things I would say is that I've had a lot of conversations working on some projects. I mean, a lot of conversations with CEOs, COOs about technology, and one of the big complaints I get is that everybody wants just a few dollars a month per resident, or it's easy to use, and pretty soon I've got this massive technology bill that takes lots of pricing. What this actually does for you is to make sure that you get the right revenue at the right time, and that you actually there's a lesson there to be sure and silence your cell phone when you're going live. But that this is a tool that actually, I look at this and I think, I can't imagine how anybody can afford not to do this, because it means more revenue, an easy way to get there, to get the right price, so that you're creating, where we started, right, creating value for residents.
Absolutely.
So I'd really encourage you to reach out to Alex, schedule a demo, talk to him about what you're doing. You can reach him through LinkedIn. You can reach him through, they've got a website, for the pricing assistant. You can reach out to us and we'll make sure you get connected. But I just, kudos. I would say Further was brilliant to bring you on board, because, as you know, our mission at Senior Living Foresight is to make the lives of people who live and work in senior living better. And this is a tool that will do that. They're just winners for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Jada in the background, who produced the show for us. And we will be back with another great show next Friday.